I'm Christopher Lee. Join me for 100 years of horror. "17-year-old Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, in 1816. The novel was published 2 years later. Though it was adapted for the stage throughout the 19th century, it was really the invention of the cinema which caused Frankenstein to become synonymous with medical science run amok, of creators abdicating responsibility for what they have created, persons whose work ultimately destroys them.
The strange vacation that produced Frankenstein was a time of drugs, sex, and hysteria. In a villa called Diodati, near Geneva, Mary Shelley and her friends tried to frighten each other with ghost stories. Mary Shelley, then only 17, outdid her companions with a tale involving electricity, galvanism, and the scientific creation of life. In this drug-induced orgiastic state, the overpowering monster was born into the world.
The 1910 Edison version of Frankenstein runs from 7 to 12 minutes. The film was long thought to be lost for 60 or 70 years before being rediscovered in the mid-1980s. The monster was portrayed by Charles Ogle, an Edison Company player who covered himself with glop in order to resemble a pretty hilarious-looking monster. This Frankenstein is perhaps the only monster to have been created in an oven.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
In 1931, Boris Karloff, then a struggling middle-aged character actor, was plucked from show business obscurity by director James Whale to play the part of the monster, and thus began a new era of movie horror. Frankenstein held the record as Universal Studios' biggest moneymaker for decades.
Well, it was extremely interesting because it was a sort of a challenge. Here you were playing an inarticulate creature with a half-formed brain that was barely functioning, but bit by bit was beginning to function more and more and more. And still you had to communicate.
Elizabeth!
I've heard various stories, including from my father, who worked with Whale 6 years later in a movie called The Road Back, that it was Whale sketched an idea out of what he thought the monster should look like, and gave it to Pierce. And from that, Pierce created something.
James Whale probably had a lot to do with the design of the Frankenstein monster makeup. He was an artist himself. He apparently did a lot of sketches. And he was fascinated by Karloff's facial structure. That was one of the things that attracted to him initially, to offer him the part. And the thing that's so fascinating about that makeup is that it's a very subtle exaggeration of Karloff's own features. Apparently, Karloff himself added the touch of the eyelids. He and Pierce felt that the makeup let the monster look too wide awake, and so they took 2 pieces of a substance known as mortician's wax and put them on Karloff's lids, adding that sleepy, half-awake look that's so haunting. Karloff actually took out a dental bridge on one side of his face, which created a sense of a hollow, a more cadaverous kind of look.
Don't touch that!
Actually, the monster, poor old thing, he was extremely misunderstood and abused. Actually, the monster only got violent when he was attacked by people who got frightened and panicked. And when they attacked him, he attacked back naturally, and being rather big and strong, he was dangerous.
After Bride of Frankenstein, the next time he wore the makeup in Son of Frankenstein, he had started to put weight on. He was getting a little bit heavier, and that beautiful sculptured face that he had just started to fill out a little bit, as we all do as we get older. And unfortunately, the monster lost that edge, shall we say.
Any letters that I got from children, and I got a great many, if they had anything to say at all, they expressed great compassion for the monster. It was really indicative of what the part really was.
One of the themes that I became fascinated with was the Frankenstein myth, and that has other, maybe related, but deeper connections for me. It was truth or science versus superstition and religion. It was the questioning of the right to ask questions that the faithful didn't think you should ask. And that's very much part of the Frankenstein myth.
The Bride of Frankenstein was originally heralded as The Return of Frankenstein. Universal Studios announced a coast-to-coast search for the perfect actress to portray the bride, but it had already been decided that Elsa Lanchester landed the role. What's ironic to note here is that not only did Elsa Lanchester portray the bride in the picture, she also portrayed author Mary Shelley in the picture's prologue.
Many critics regard Bride of Frankenstein as the greatest horror film ever made, and one of those rare occasions in which the sequel was actually an improvement on the original. Karloff, as the monster, turned in one of his most memorable performances. Originally, the film was written as a parody of monster movies, but when director James Whale decided to do the film relatively straight, the screenwriter John Balderston resigned from the production in anger. But it was too late. The monster had taken a bride.
I think I worked every day in the film, and the film took about 8 weeks to make. I had enormous lifts on and enormous body pads and the boots. And the boots weighed about 16 pounds apiece. All told, the whole outfit weighed about 40 to 45 pounds.
Oh, he had back trouble for years and years, and I think he had 3 back surgeries over a period of several years.
In 1938, Frankenstein and Dracula were re-released along with Son of Kong. Their run at a small Los Angeles theater created such a sensation at the box office that Universal Pictures, then under new management, was amazed at the chance success. They thought to themselves, let's get Karloff, let's get Lugosi, let's get Basil Rathbone, we can make some money here.
My mother wouldn't let us go to horror films when we were very young, which of course added tremendously to their appeal. And that changed when I got into high school. And the first one that I saw was The Son of Frankenstein.
Originally cast as the son of Frankenstein, Peter Lorre fell ill. Universal opted for the more prestigious Basil Rathbone.
Benson, turn on the generator.
Technicolor was considered, then rejected. Instead, the film was designed for stark shadows in the manner of German expressionist films of the 1920s.
By heaven, I think you're a worse fiend than your father. Where is this monster? Where is he? I'll savor your sign till you confess. And if you don't, I'll feed you to the villagers.
Even though the character only appeared in 2 motion pictures, Lugosi made Igor so memorable that the name was linked to all wicked assistants, in the same way the name Frankenstein was associated with his monstrous creation. Karloff felt he had taken the character as far as he could, and that even in this film, the monster was becoming unimportant to the story.
I only played the monster actually 3 times of the first 3. Then I could sort of see the handwriting on the wall, that there wasn't much left of the character. And I had the good fortune to branch out into other things. I did some plays in New York and all sorts.
Oh, that's right.
These home movies were taken on the set of Son of Frankenstein. Boris told me, many years later, that his joy was evident in the home movies because during the shooting of this film, Boris's then wife gave birth to his only child, Sarah.
The best part of the home movies, at least from the public's point of view, is it's the only color footage of my father and the Frankenstein makeup. And there's about, 3 minutes if that, but about 3 minutes of my father with Jack Pierce clowning around on the set. And it's really pretty special footage. Yeah, he's joking Pierce, and he sticks his tongue out, and he smiles in the makeup, which, of course, is probably the only time caught on film.
Boris also celebrated his 51st birthday during production. Universal wouldn't offer Karloff a good script or enough money to play the role again, but he did do it for free, appearing with other Hollywood stars at a celebrity baseball game in 1941. Makeup wizard Jack Pierce hovered near the dugout.
There's a curse on our village. The curse of Frankenstein.
Basil Rathbone was busy playing Sherlock Holmes, so writers invented a second son of Frankenstein, played by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, headlining the fine cast.
The Ghost of Frankenstein. It was a wonderful cast of people, beginning with Bela Lugosi, whom I didn't know very well. We didn't have much to do with each other in the picture, as I remember, and he was a very private sort of person, even when he was on the set. He was very much to himself, and very much a gentleman, as I remember. Hungarian, of course, which we all know. And a lovely cast of Sir Cedric Hardwicke, Lionel Atwill, Lon Chaney Jr.
He was very jealous of Boris Karloff. Really? Yeah, because he thought he said he's exactly. He says that guy's not one damn bit better than I am.
Father was Frankenstein, that your mother was the lightning.
When I spoke to my father about what his favorite roles had been over the years, Igor in The Son of Frankenstein was one of his favorites, and I asked him why, and he said he hardly ever got a chance to do comedy, and there were some parts of that role which had a comedic timing to it, and that he liked, and he was always very proud of his ability to do comedy.
You're going to give him life?
Yes. Not for the purposes that you think, Igor. I'm giving him another brain.
This Dr. Frankenstein accidentally places Igor's sly and sinister brain into the body of the giant. For a moment, the brute speaks in Lugosi's voice, only to be struck blind because of a difference in blood types. Ah, details, details.
He picked up the megaphone. Now, the assistant director was standing there. The megaphone was here. He could hardly cram it in. He drew it up and said, "Get Miss Anchors on the staircase." So the assistant director left and came back, and he said, "Miss Anchors is on the staircase." So he picked up the megaphone, and the secretary stayed behind and out of the picture, and Evelyn was on the staircase in a dressing gown. And from then on, he paced back and forth at the foot of the stairway with the megaphone. And he said, "Now, Evelyn, your mother's been carried away by the Frankenstein monster. Your father's been killed by the wolf man. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. The servants have all fled. Your lover's being chased over the moors by the dogs. And you're all alone in this ancient, slimy, oozy castle. And I want to get the feeling from you when you come down these stairs that you're fed up with it all."
Originally, Lon Chaney was to have played both the monster and the Wolfman using a split-screen effect. When that proved impractical, Universal hired Lugosi, who had refused the role a dozen years earlier. Despite Lugosi being 60 years old, it made sense. Igor's brain was in the monster's skull.
I remember seeing the photographs of me looking at my father in the Frankenstein makeup, and obviously not sure of who it was from the look, but obviously from the voice. Everyone knows exactly who my dad is when they hear his voice.
Preview audiences roared when they heard the monster speak with a Hungarian accent. Executives cut all Lugosi's dialogue and references to his blindness. Thus, Bela stumbled with arms outstretched for no apparent reason. Boris Karloff returned to the series as a mad surgeon, but as he feared, his friend the monster had been reduced to a walking prop. Glenn Strange was drafted to follow in the footsteps of Karloff, Chaney Jr., and Lugosi by playing the Frankenstein monster in several films for Universal. He also played the role frequently on television and in personal appearances. Altogether, Glenn Strange played the monster more times than any other actor. In fact, when Boris Karloff died in 1968, it was a photo of Strange that actually accompanied Boris's obituary.
I'm going to give that brain of yours a new home in the skull of the Frankenstein monster.
There's nobody ever helped anybody more than he helped me. I never forgot that. He would stay on the set. I asked him for advice, because I wanted to do the thing as near as he did. And he coached me on the walk and the movements and so on and so forth. Then it came back House of Dracula. You remember when I was laying in the quicksand, the skeleton of Karloff and the quicksand? Well, I was in that all day long, and that stuff was cold. And Chaney didn't work that day, so he came down with a fifth. And I think I got most of it. And by the time I got about half undressed, I was so looped I couldn't hardly get up. And he said, "Come on, take another slug of this." And down it goes.
Count Dracula sleeps in this coffin, but rises every night at sunset. Chick is right. This is awful silly stuff.
Dracula, the Wolfman, and the monster were all back in the 1948 parody, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Universal was saved initially by horror films and then saved in the 40s by Abbott and Costello, and eventually the two genres came together, and the latter Abbott and Costello films were all related to the monsters. And one of their best ones is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
The early television anthology series Tales of Tomorrow adapted the original story with Lon Chaney.
Number one was I felt the monster should be silent, and that would be more scary. No noises. Lon hated that idea. Lon just hated it, but he didn't say anything, and he kept coming to me in rehearsal and saying, well, just a little roar as I got off the table. I said, no, Lon, no, nothing, silence. I had a separate camera looking straight down on the operating table where the monster comes to life, and we were all set to go, and off we go onto air. And comes the critical moment where he comes to life, and Lon goes, "Roar!" And I said, that son of a... He's not supposed to say anything, not supposed to make a sound. Upon Lon did fall, but we found out he'd been pulling on a quart of liquor during the 4.5 hours of makeup. And sad thing was, about a half hour after the show, we're still licking our wounds, and we hear this screaming from the makeup room. Was one floor below. It was his wife, and poor man didn't work for 3 years after that.
Chaney's collapse was a result of his ongoing struggle with alcoholism. By the mid-1950s, it looked like the Frankenstein legend had all but lost its luster. Then Hammer Films of England resurrected the story in 1958, when yours truly played the creature in The Curse of Frankenstein.
The making of that movie, I think it took between 5 and 6 weeks. I think it was intended to be done in something like 3. Was, of course, a landmark in the history of the cinema, and certainly in this kind of genre.
This performer only played the monster once, but Hammer Films continued the Frankenstein saga into the 1970s with various other monsters and varying degrees of success. Then, in 1994, filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola brought the Frankenstein story to the big screen once again with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
I was concerned about all that, you know, it's like doing Hamlet or doing, playing Jesus or whatever, you know, it's, there's so much so many preconceived ideas about it, and the real, in this case, Boris Karloff doing it, though it's a lot different. I would look at tapes of as many stroke victims as I could see, because Ken and I both felt that that would be the closest thing, someone who was relearning to speak and say things that they took for granted before.
Francis Ford Coppola, a filmmaker I admire greatly, was present at the premiere of this film, as indeed was I. Afterwards, somebody asked me, what did I think the major difference was between his Frankenstein and mine? I answered only slightly tongue-in-cheek, 40 years and $40 million.